Let's go into James' question. He says, I've just done a massive bikepacking trip, 1,000 miles and 70,000 feet of climbing. Long days in the saddle, racing up climbs against mates. His question, what is the best way to recover so I can get back to hard structured training in the best way? I've only seen info before and during training camps and races and not after. And he says, also training the energy systems like you do there at TrainerRoad. And he says that in quotes because that's what we say. We train energy systems. That's our focus. He says training the energy systems works. Says I didn't do a workout that was more than 3 hours, yet I managed to do 10-hour days with some big efforts thrown in. And obviously he was able to make it all the way through, which is pretty impressive. So thanks for the help, guys. Absolutely, James. We're intentional about that approach. Definitely not shooting in the dark. So there's science to back it up. So we probably have to operate on some assumptions here. A bikepacking trip being 1,000 miles and 70,000 feet of climbing, we'll assume that this is like a 7 to 10 day block, whatever it was. It seems like this is his first go at some sort of a big effort like this as well, some sort of big block. For those of us listening to this that haven't done a bikepacking trip like this, we should probably be thinking of that big training block we're planning or have done, or that stage race we're planning or have done, something along those lines. So then we can find a point of relevance with this. But probably like the first things first, you have to think about like the goal behind all of this. So you've just done that huge amount of training for one reason or another. In this case, it sounds like it was just enjoyment. But in some cases, you'll be doing these sort of big blocks because you want to stress this particular energy system in a particular way for a specific period of time. And you may have something else coming back up. So suddenly urgency is brought into play, and timing and scheduling and everything else. So clearly the answer after doing a big block like this is, yeah, take time off, but it's more complicated than that, right, Amber?
It can be, yeah. I mean, the focus needs to be on recovery, and recovery can be a lot of different things, right? It could be no riding, it could be easy riding. I think in general, I think it's important to restrain yourself in some way so that your body and your mind can recover from this. And I think importantly, you want to feel really motivated and really eager to return by the time you get back to structured training. So that's kind of the big picture goal with this. And I think another aspect of this, in addition to recovery, is recognizing that all of that work that you did in the previous week is intended to trigger physiological adaptations. So you want to make sure that in this time that you're recovering, you're really focused on absorbing those adaptations, absorbing that stress in a really healthy and productive way. But you also probably learned a lot in terms of mental and emotional skills too. So what are the lessons that you learned? Are there some things that you learned that you can really apply moving forward to grow yourself as an athlete and develop yourself as an athlete? So taking some time to kind of think about those things and let those things settle in with you it sounds a little woo-woo, but I think it's actually really important. One way when we were talking about this earlier, I was kind of thinking of this as a reverse taper. So if you think about tapering, it's a really, really individual experience. And what works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another. So some people really have good luck and good outcomes with a ton of rest. Other people need to keep their legs going in some form or another, or they're going to feel really blocked up and flat. So I think a similar principle applies here. So it is very individual, but generally, as general principles apply, as we always like to fall back on general principles. So the big general principle is the recovery, feeling motivated when you come back and really getting the sense that you're absorbing the work that you did, the lessons that you learned. By the end of my career, for example, I could definitely take a full week off, something like that. If I did a huge 7 to 10 day block, I could take a week off the bike completely and come back firing. But that's me. And if I reflect back on the very beginning of my career, I'm not sure that would necessarily have been the case. But again, that's something that's highly individual that you can experiment with. I'll just share a quick story. The very first time I went over to Europe, we did this huge block of back-to-back stage races, and it was at a much higher level of intensity than anything I had ever encountered before. So I learned a whole new level of suffering on that trip. And then I flew back to the States, and at the time I was living in California, but we had a big race block coming up on the East Coast in Philadelphia. We had the Philly Triple Crown, which included a crit in Lehigh, and then we were going to go to Philly to race the the Philly bike race. And I remember I was staying with a host family in Philadelphia leading into the Lehigh crit. And I was so smashed from this block in Europe. I was jet lagged. I was utterly destroyed. I didn't touch my bike for close to a week. And it was also about that time that I discovered the combination of Nutella and peanut butter. So I literally spent a week eating waffles with a mix of Nutella and peanut butter and laying on the couch. And that was it. And then I went and raced this. I think I did one shakeout ride before the Lehigh crit, and I felt amazing. I mean, because I had discovered this whole new level of suffering, I remember the whole time being in that crit and just thinking, okay, when's this going to get hard? When's this going to get painful? When are we actually going to go? And I ended up doing a monster attack at the finish, leading. I almost lapped the field, set up a teammate for the win. It was a super fun race, and it felt like a breeze. And that was with virtually no riding the week before. That's me. That's not necessarily going to be the case for everybody. So the detraining process is going to vary for each person, but I think in the big picture, you can kind of give yourself a break and play it by ear. You know, if you really don't feel like riding that day, don't ride. If you're starting to feel kind of flat and meh, get back on the bike and take it a little bit easy. But just ride to feel good. Kind of listen to your body, let your body lead the way in that recovery process.
That's a huge point. Like it's almost like you'd undo the work you've done, right, Amber? If you just do all the work and then try to continue on.
Yeah,
and
you need to absorb.
That's kind of like a temptation to do, though, right? Because sometimes you're going through these camps and sometimes bodies respond well to stress, and you find yourself like at your fastest actually at the end of those blocks. And suddenly you get a few PRs and you get maybe like you're close to a KOM time, and you're like, I could rest, but it's just one KOM. And then you end up then it's just the addiction hits, and then you can't stop chasing them, and you end up, undoing all the work that you did. So that is a really good point. Like, also, man, going back to what we did, this is a common theme here, but understanding stress and how training affects us, not just physically, but when you go through a big training block like that, you probably also accrued a huge amount of emotional stress as well throughout that process. So it is really important to plan in with a block, not just plan the work, but plan the sort of downtime that you need. Even if that's just like, taking one extra day off of work or something before you return to the typical schedule that you have, that one extra day off after that sort of an event can be really, really helpful. Alex, how did you manage that after your Cape Epic block? Because that was a big block of volume and you carried on working and still doing everything that you needed to do with your job, everything else like that. So how did you manage that? What was your week like after?
Yeah, I'm honestly, Amber and I have talked about this before, but I'm honestly very jealous of her ability to just take a week off the bike. Like, I was like, you can just come back and race. She's like, yeah. I would come back and just be so blocked if I took a week off the bike.
Yeah.
But I think the mental aspect is big, and it's like, I wouldn't downplay the role of Nutella and peanut butter in her result there, like, I think there's got to be some fun in it, like 100% like err on the side of easy. But for me, like, I take probably a day or two off the bike, and then we'd have like an easy week with endurance rides and a spin. After the Cape Epic week, I was actually lucky enough that my brother brought me up to North Star and we did lifts. So it was just like low intensity for like, in terms of like aerobic, like definitely beat up my upper body, but it was just a fun day. Like, I just got to ride trails with my brother all day. So it was like, as far as like mental stress, it was like the opposite. So, and for me, like you were saying, like you can kind of ride that high for a little while. And I think for me in that recovery week, it takes a bit for my body to be like, oh, sweet, I can recover. Like, I'll come into like Tuesday or Wednesday and actually still feel pretty good. And then my body's like, oh, we're taking it easy, I can recover. And then Thursday, it's like, oh crap, like my legs are so heavy. Yeah. So it's like, I think the big level goals are just like mentally, when are you ready to go again? When are you excited to ride your bike? And I think that's a huge sign across the board. And it's figuring out how you get there. I think Amber and I sit pretty opposite ends of the spectrum on how to get there. And there's a whole slew of space in between, right? You could take 4 days off and then start to ramp it back up. You could take 3 days off, or you could do a day off ride. But I think overarching, it's just, when am I excited to ride my bike? And we've talked about it before. I treat it kind of like the sickness. When you feel good, give it an extra day or two, and then start to ramp it back up. So once you're excited to ride your bike, give it that extra like 2 days and then start to ramp it back up again. Like I just did my first threshold intervals yesterday after the move, and like I wasn't quite ready, but I was itching to get after it. Like I was so excited to be pushing it again. And I think like my legs will come around pretty fast, but it was just that like I was excited to get out the door and get after it. Like that's what I'm looking for. Like if I'm not excited to get out the door and get after it, I would probably bump it down to an endurance ride.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good, you've mentioned that a bunch of times too, Amber, is wait until it's there, then wait just a touch more, and then you'll be able to make the most of it. Alex, we also have a note down here about like the diligence that you apply to training and applying that to work. Because that's another side of things too, is it's easy to feel like diligence is necessary to be applied to training. But then with recovery, we kind of like throw out all rules. We throw out we kind of just let things happen. And many times type A people, if they just let things happen, they end up happening at an intense level and everything is, we don't end up recovering. And that's a key point too.
For sure. I think it's weird to call it diligence in recovery because it's almost like non-diligence in a way. It's allowing yourself to be lazy, right? Like it's hard for us as athletes because it's the intervals that we feel like we put a lot of work into. But to Amber's point, the adaptation happens in that reverse taper in that week that you're giving your body off. So it's like if you're continuing to pin it and you're pushing it 20 watts on the recovery week, it's like it may feel good in the moment, but you're not going to adapt to the work. So it's like that, like overshooting your power targets in your recovery week is going to negate all that work you put into that training block or that fake race or that adventure ride. So it's like the goal is to reap those benefits moving forward. So it's like just allowing yourself to, it's a 60-minute spin, like 45 minutes is enough, like, it's supposed to be 220 to 240, 220 is good. It's like, if anything, err on the easy side or downgrading it or taking the day off completely. Like, I think we're so used to trying to hit everything perfectly that perfect for a recovery week is too easy for us sometimes. So it's like, doesn't feel like an accomplishment and we don't feel like we're pushing ourselves. So it's a little more difficult especially for athletes like me who are type A. Yeah. Don't know if anybody saw, but a clear example was Jen and I were moving. My stuff was all packed probably 2 weeks before we moved. And Jen, the day before we moved, still had her closet still fully needing to be packed. So.
Yeah, that's how we work. We tend to like obsess over the details, but in some cases we don't. And then we end up finding ourselves putting in too much for sure. So yeah, allow yourself to be lazy. Now, Chad, there's science to this too, right? In terms of like looking at actually what needs to happen to your body in order for you to absorb that training stress you just dosed yourself with.
Exactly. So first off, I kind of want to just make one observation in that while Alex and Amber seem to be at polar opposite ends of their recovery protocols, I found myself closer to what Alex described earlier in my racing career and now closer to what Amber described later in my racing career. And I'm sure a number of things changed, that age absolutely being one of them, but it might also have been a process of learning too. I figured out that I didn't respond as quickly as I thought I might like to when I used Alex's approach. Maybe Amber 7 days off the bike, I can guarantee I would emerge flat. I'd probably benefit from doing it. Those first couple of days would be rough. But my point is I land somewhere in the middle, probably a little more toward Amber's side, but it changes with time, I suspect. Probably, and this is for me alone, but I'm going to guess that carries across riders. Okay. And then as far as the scientific observations, if you will, I'm really just going to kind of touch on a number of things that you guys already talked about. And then I'm also going to revisit sleep. So my first question would be, how long does it take you to re-regulate your sleep or regulate? I don't know. It's regular and then you leave it and you come back to it. Is that regulation or re-regulation? I don't know.
Mind blown. I've never thought of that.
Right?
Can re-regulation exist? No. Sorry. Yeah.
But as we've talked about, you have to come down from that sympathetic elevation and probably a disturbed sleep schedule, because I'm going to guess over the course of this bikepacking trip, you were not getting the best sleep of your life. That schedule probably varied. There are all sorts of things that need to realign. In particular, recognize that, sleep happens in different stages, and the deep sleep stage of it is about physical recovery. So, and then the REM sleep, or the dreaming portion of your sleep, is about mental recovery. And those two things are going to be out of balance for a while too. your body's going to probably shift more toward deep sleep and physical restoration. And then the mental comes. So you might be lacking in one of those two departments for a little while until they start to balance back out. That's not something that's hard for you to pin down either. You're going to feel it. You're going to feel it in your brain. You're going to feel it in your body. So when you reach a point where you're feeling good and you're thinking sharply, then it's probably safe to resume training. How you do it, that's again going to vary from rider to rider. Also consider regulation of gut disturbance. This is real, right? So your food intake over the course of that bike packing trip ideally was comprised of foods that you were familiar with and you knew were going to work for you over the course of something like that. And you probably addressed palate fatigue. And of course, it's not going to be heavy stuff. I don't imagine you were frequenting mini marts. So you probably had all this stuff on you. So it confined you to a particular selection of foods, hopefully ones that worked for you. But even if the foods worked for you, I'm going to guess the quantities were out of the ordinary because of all the work you were doing. On top of that, I'm going to guess they were probably low fiber. May not have been, but if I were going on a bike packing trip, I would go low fiber for sure.
Yes.
So pile on top of that, the fact that exercise, the stress of exercise affects the gut, and in doing so affects your immune response. So you got all these things going on, and to not to make this all about studies, but Alison Clark and Nuria Mock had a review where they said, and I quote, "Diet dramatically modulates the composition of the gut microbiota," and they liken the gut, or they don't like it, they say what it is. It's effectively an endocrine organ. What's the word? I'm totally blanking, but either way, it's responsible for the release of certain hormones, serotonin, dopamine being amongst them. So there's also a hormonal re-regulation that comes with it.
It's definitely affected. It's definitely affected by peanut butter and Nutella, right? Like, I'm just wondering what that did to my body.
Only positively. The more you have, the better it gets. That has to be the way it is.
And they have to be mixed, like Nutella on its own and peanut butter on its own.
Proper in the right ratio too. Yeah. Okay, but all this goes back to what I was just saying. You should be feeling good. You should be thinking sharply. Then you can consider whether or not you're going to resume training that day. And then just some minor points: allow the muscle soreness to completely abate. That way, your muscular system is back on track. Get to a point of feeling physically fresh and coordinated. Emphasis on coordinated. That'll tell you that your neuromuscular system, the communication between your brain and your muscles, is back on track. And as Alex touched on, I'm pretty sure Amber said something about this too, be motivated, feel ready, eager to get back on the bike. That way, you're psychologically realigned. You're ready to hit it and stay after it. Also, you have to contemplate the severity of the endeavor, because if this is something you've done numerous times and this is just another go at it, you're going to be affected very differently than someone who's doing this for a first time. If you're an athlete who logs 20 hours a week training, it's going to be a different experience and a different recovery path than someone who trains 8 to 10 hours a week. So look at your training history. Look at how severely you ran this too. Maybe some days you're just sailing along, other days you're gutting it out up really brutal climbs and then hanging on for dear life down very technical descents. All these things take different tolls. The impact of age on your rate of recovery, kind of already talked about that, but just recognize that it changes with time. And then what sort of stress are you coming back to? You might need a longer ramp back in to life to see how the stress of what you just did inflicts itself on the stress of what you have to deal with on a daily basis. So if you're coming back to a high stress environment, well, maybe if possible, give yourself a little longer run in to that high stress environment, or recognize that you're going to feel a little worse over the course of the process of readjusting back into, it sounds dramatic, but back into daily life. This was definitely a departure from that. And then finally, for anyone who's considering doing something like this, you got to be forward thinking. Consider how this figures into your training blocks. Consider how it might affect your rebound so that you can get back to training, and how the impact of these events can facilitate or hamper your training progress. I mean, that's a real concern, especially if you're on track for something. This was just a lead up to that something. How could this possibly derail or benefit that something?
Yeah. Oh man, we're a laughable bunch a lot of the times because we're so good at piling on a huge amount of stress. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing, by the way. We're just good at doing that very thing. And then we're really bad at usually allowing ourselves to actually absorb and take advantage of all that hard work. So
it's fun
great.
to play.
That's a good final parting note, right, Chad, on that, is to make sure that you're planning beyond this dosage of stress and how you're going to be able to
ideally, unless in the case this is that thing that all the work was going toward.
Yep. Which in that case,
I can't recommend taking that Monday off before you return to work enough. Mental health Mondays.
Totally.
Oh, so good. Just don't have to wake up at a certain time. Don't have to zoom into any meetings. Just chill for the day. It really resets you for like that change of environment, that change of stress.
Yep. Gives you a transitional period instead of going down and then straight back up. It smooths it out.
Yeah. I was just gonna say there's a case of the Mondays joke in there somewhere, but I'm just not on it enough today.
If you like this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up.
If you didn't like this video, you can give it a thumbs down, but let us know what you would have done differently in the comments below.
If you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, check out TrainerRoad.com.
Do it.